Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brice Lewis, and we had a very chaotic day in the NBA, obviously one of the most chaotic days of the year. The NBA trade deadline has ended, and we have a lot of moving pieces, a lot of multiple team trades, a lot of players going to new places, getting bought out, released, cut, signed. Everybody making improvements to the team, play championship teams trying to solidify themselves to make that finals run. Young teams trying to get assets for the future, maybe improve their future. All types of things happened today, and it was just a fantastic day. So we'll talk about all the news, recap all of the biggest trades and impactful trades around the league right here on this podcast. We cover it all right here on this podcast right now. But we're going to start with obviously the biggest news. There's a lot of big trade news, so I guess we'll start with the biggest team with the biggest trade news. And that is the Los Angeles Clippers, as the Clippers completed a 3-team trade today with the Knicks and the Wizards. The Clippers landed Marcus Morris, a big crucial signing for their lineup, and Isaiah Thomas, but it has been reported they will let go of Isaiah Thomas. The Knicks acquire Mo Harkless and a 2020 first rounder, and the Wizards get Jerome Robinson. Obviously, if you look at this trade, the Clippers really never gave up anything and got back a lot. Marcus Morris is having a career year this year in New York, average in points, rebounds, and assists. Marcus Morris has been a proven player. Between the two Morris brothers, he is considered the better of the two. He is a guy who is going to make this lineup even more dangerous. Clippers were already kind of neck and neck with the Lakers, and I feel like the question is, have this pushed them past the Lakers, as the Lakers sat pat at the trade deadline. Obviously the Clippers are going to trot out a lineup with Paul George, Pat Beverly, Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Morris, and Zubac. So this lineup looks very dangerous. And the Clippers really, they gave up some guys. They freed up some space. They actually have roster spots available too, because they're probably going to sign some people from the buyouts and acquire some people that way too. So they're not even done with maybe forming out their roster, but we knew that this team was a top heavy team. Marcus Morris helps add more depth to this team. Because like I said, this trade, they really gave up nothing. They absolutely gave up nothing. So, this Clippers team looks very good on paper. They look extremely excellent, and they look like they'll definitely be there at the end. This is probably one of the best starting lineups in the league. This team has also one of the best starting top 8, because what you got here is I just mentioned the starting lineup, and you still got Lou Williams, and you still got Montrez and Larry Shamet. So they have a great 8-man rotation. They really have a lot of versatile. This starting lineup they're going to put out there with Marcus is very versatile, because Paul George can play 2 through 4, Kawhi can play 2 through 4, Marcus Morris, if needed, can play some 3, but can play 3 and 4. I mean, you got players who can guard every position. Obviously, Patrick Beverly's not afraid to guard the tallest player in the league. Obviously, he did with Kevin Durant last year in the playoffs. I mean, this is just news that obviously Clipper fans were thrilled to hear, because obviously the question is between the two LA teams is which team was going to make a move, which team was going to make a change, which team was going to make that final roster adjustment to push towards the finals. Obviously, like I said earlier, the Lakers at stand pat, where the Clippers that went ahead and made a move. We can say the Clippers definitely got better from this trade, and they've already beaten the Lakers twice in the regular season, so we don't know what this means towards the playoffs if they meet. Obviously the Lakers were kind of considering trading Kyle Kuzma. That was really the only news that you heard. They tried to get Andre Iguodala, but they just could not find the right way or composition or get another team involved that the Memphis Grizzlies would want to give up Andre Iguodala. And so when they struck out on him, it was kind of just like that was really the only person that they really tried to go after heavily. Renner, at this moment, I think the Lakers are probably looking more at potentially waiting for see what Darren Collison decides to do, because he'll be a free agent, so maybe they can still get a guy. But the Clippers obviously went ahead and made moves. This is obviously a first-class organization. Jerry West has done it again with Doc Rivers, and they're just creating the best team they can put out there potentially on the floor to then, equal a great team and a great championship run potentially again this year. And it makes the playoffs all that much more interesting, I think. So it's definitely something that's extremely interesting, something you definitely want to tune into and watch. It's something that I think a lot of people are very, very much in tune with. And I think that, the Clippers are going to have to do everything they can to come out there and be successful. This is something that if everything works out, we'll see if the Lakers standing pat hurts them, and we'll see if these moves actually end up being beneficial or hurting anybody. Obviously, we already know how good the Clippers were already, so making a trade like this can only just help them improve and get even better. And that's what you really want to hear or see. But we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see what happens with it. It's actually very interesting in my opinion, because the Clippers have always shown the thing about Clippers is even though they give up a lot of assets, they still had just one or two assets left. Or that's why, obviously in NBA, it's great that you have these 3-4 team deals. So maybe you don't have assets yourself, but maybe you can get another team in there to give up their assets. And maybe you give up one player here or a pick there and still be able to get the player you actually end up wanting at the end of the day. So it's one of those things that kind of creates an interesting situation. Now, also, the Lakers also wanted to go after Marcus Morris, but the Knicks wanted Kuzma, Green, and picks for Marcus Morris. Obviously, that's a lot for Marcus Morris. Literally, if they flip Kuzma for Marcus Morris, some people may not like it because it's older player for a younger player, but you would feel like, that'd be fine. But when they ask for Danny Green and picks, that sounds like, oh no, we're not just going to give you our bestest player this season for nothing. We're going to ask you for the bankroll and ask you for everything. And people are just like, and also people look at the trade ammunition and think, okay, the Knicks wanted Kuzma, Green, and picks. And then for the Clippers, all they had to give us Mo Harkless. And then they got a pick. People wonder, is there some favoritism there? That kind of was a little suspicious how that move was made, how they asked for more from him than they asked from the Clippers. Obviously, it just creates a very big question. Obviously, like I said, Clippers are not going to keep Isaiah Thomas either. They acquired him in this trade. They weren't going to keep him. A lot of people are actually kind of excited, thinking, oh, Isaiah Thomas can be on a winning team, but it looks like he'll be cut. We'll have to see what happens with that. Also, the Lakers are expected to work out J.R. Smith again. Obviously, not since they weren't able to get another shooter. I think J.R. Smith is a shooter, and I think maybe trying to see if they can potentially get a shooter like JR, cheap alternative option, veteran guy would be a good addition also. They they were just trying to do what they got to do. So we'll have to see. Who's the best team in LA right now? It's very easy to sit here and say the Clippers are the best team now, and we'll have to see what happens when obviously the Clippers get their entire team finalized, I guess you can almost say, through this transition period, and then we'll see what they look like. Because obviously the Clippers, even with a top-heavy team, they're trying to add depth. They're trying to be like basically where a lot of top-heavy teams are top-heavy, then outside of that, it's pretty, very, very weak. So really the top-heavy, the stars have to carry the load, and then the other players have to just give them enough. The Clippers are still trying to be even throughout, where they still have enough at the end of the day. Because, obviously, I would think the finishing lineup potentially in the fourth quarter would be Beverly, Kawhi, Paul George, Marcus Morris. Actually, no. I don't think it depends on the situation. Actually, the finishing lineup, if with Marcus Morris would be Lou Williams at point, then Kawhi, then Paul George, then Marcus Morris, then Montrezl Harrell, which would be a very dangerous starting five. Anybody can beat you from three in that, except for Montrezl. But really, everybody got 4 players to beat you from three. You got You have tons of talent. I mean, it really just depends, bro. Obviously, I'm sure Doc Rivers, with his great coaching, will make adjustments like, oh, okay, we're going in defensive. Okay, Patrick Beverley in the game for Lou, stuff like that. But, you know, it's a great day for the Clippers, a great trade for them, and we'll have to see what happens with the Lakers moving forward. But coming up next, the Oklahoma City stay put, no trades. A lot of people think we're going to trade maybe Steven Adams or Neil Gallinari. The 76ers add 2 shooters from the Golden State Warriors at the deadline. Where does that put them? And also, we'll discuss, can Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid coexist in Philadelphia, or is it just not big enough for the both of them, as there's been reports and a lot of people speculating about both of them playing on the same team and why the team has struggled when you have 2 of maybe what you consider the better players in the NBA coming up right here.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the big Clippers trade they did to make themselves a better team, a more versatile team, and a better overall team. We also talked about why the Lakers maybe potentially didn't make a move, and also some of the fallout of both of those decisions by both teams. Now we're going to get into some more trade news. The Oklahoma City Thunder, interestingly, at the deadline did not make any moves. Obviously, the 2 most sought after people from the Thunder was Danilo Gallinari and Steven Adams. Obviously, Danilo Gallinari, you know, he had an expiring contract. He also had a career year. He's been healthy. So obviously people felt like he had a lot of value. He's a shooter, versatile 3-4 guy. So people thought like he had a lot of value. But they didn't trade him. And also Steven Adams was also a guy that people thought maybe they'd trade. Obviously has a bigger contract. But he's still a very solid center at this point in his career. Could be a starting center for any team in the league. Obviously we heard teams that were interested in them. I think the Thunder, with the team that I have, listen, we're not saying they're going to a championship, but it'll be very interesting to see what happens moving forward with them. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of, like, the progression and where they go in the future. I think we'll have to see. Obviously, I feel like, and you can sit here and say, like, overall, the team looks good. You think there's a lot of potential there, obviously, with Oklahoma City with that young talent. So we'll be interested to see what happens. Obviously, when you're in trade talks and trade deadline, like Adams and Gallinari was, obviously, like I said, Gallinari is going to be a free agent, but Adams might be in the trade talks this summer potentially. Obviously, sometimes teams like to wait till maybe the lottery happens, so what picks people have. So then it's like, okay, well, maybe we can package Steven Adams, get a pick, because obviously since Oklahoma City looks like they're going to make the playoffs, they're not going to be a lottery team, they're going to be a playoff team. So you never know if they still make additions to their team or try to get an upper pick. They can maybe throw Steven Adams in there and there first and see maybe what that gets them. Plus all the other picks they accumulated from the Clippers in that big Paul George trade over the offseason. So I think that it's okay for them to not make any big moves here right now. I think Oklahoma City did what they think was best for them. And I think sometimes holding pat at the trade deadline can sometimes be what's best for the team. And now we get to see it. Maybe, how far can this roster go? They have talent, Schroeder. Obviously they have one of the most clutch players in Chris Paul. Steven Adams. They have also, a lot of other guys like Gallinari. Like I said, he's having a career year. Cedric Alexander, he's having a career year in his second year in the league, so they have all the potential in the world to be one of the better teams going up into the future, so we'll have to see what happens with that. Also, the Philadelphia 76ers made a trade. It wasn't on the trade deadline day, but literally the night before, they traded to Golden State. They traded for Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson Jr. This was a very needed trade for the 76ers. They needed shooting. That's what they needed at the deadline. And they got 2 shooting two shooters at the deadline, because those are the two shooters for Golden State. Obviously, Alec Burks has been a player who, he's been a good player since he came into the league. I mean, he recently just had a 30-point game for the Warriors. He's a guy who could score. He could give you some points. He can give you some buckets. And, he also can shoot the ball. Glenn Robinson has been more of a shooter. So I think this helps expand, obviously, their shooting, obviously, with Ben Simmons. One thing with me in this trade discussions with the 76ers is like, during the trades deadline and the next couple of days after, a lot of times it's going to be hard for players who just got traded to start right away, because obviously you have to get in, you have to kind of learn a little bit, then get on the floor. And, obviously, since they made that trade the night before, I'm sure Glenn Robinson and Alec Burks could not get to Philadelphia and then play, boom, suit up next night. I'm sure they got to go through some initial things that you go through when you get traded and sent to a new team. So they're probably waiting to see what happens when it comes to that. Obviously, the 76ers playing the Milwaukee Bucks. So, obviously this is a pretty big game for them to maybe lose some guys. But they really didn't give too much up in this trade to Golden State. So I think that, the 76ers, again, this is just what they feel like they probably have to do to potentially maybe make a run at a championship. Obviously, the 76ers are going through a lot of issues, a lot of people would say, within the locker room with Ben Simmons and with Joel Embiid, trying to figure out whose team it is, who's the man on this team. And that's what we're going to discuss really next here, is just, if you think about it, obviously there's been a question about both these guys. Both these two have the potential to be great players. Obviously Ben Simmons' weakness is he can't shoot. So, I mean, he's an elite finisher, and he's elite in the paint. When he gets downhill, he's unstoppable, but he can't shoot. And in the playoffs, it's easier to defend something like that. That's why he hasn't been as effective in the playoffs. See, Embiid is obviously what a lot of people consider the best overall player, because he's the most dominant. Embiid can drop 30 on anybody every night. He has the capabilities. The only problem with Embiid is that he's out of shape a lot. He gets injured a lot. So it's just like, can you rely on him? Can you trust him? So both players have their big issues. It's just, who would you rather have? Obviously, there's been ideas of maybe trading Embiid away, because Simmons' skill set, since he's such an elite passer, if you put shooters around him, the offense will thrive. And then obviously if you have spacing, that can help Simmons get to the paint, and it work for him and it works for everybody involved. Where obviously with Embiid on the team, you can't necessarily play that way, because Embiid's going to clog the paint, because you don't want Embiid always taking threes. So Embiid's going to clog the paint, and then you got Simmons who can't shoot, so he has to go into the paint, and now it's a clogged up mess, and now maybe Simmons can't get those easier shots in the paint because Embiid's there. So obviously there's always been discussion about, should they trade Embiid? And also there's been, should they trade Simmons? Because Embiid, again, is, like I said, a lot of people feel like he's the best overall player. And with Embiid, if Embiid is the best overall player, well, we know who you need to trade, Ben Simmons, because he's a liability shooting, and for Ben Simmons, the thing about it is, for either one of these players, you can probably get you a pretty big package back for them. Like, Simmons has all the potential to be is a star in this league. You could get you a starting point guard back for Ben Simmons, and it still works with Embiid. And Embiid's the same way. You trade Embiid, somebody's willing to give up a lot for Embiid, because they know if Embiid can stay healthy here, we have a dominant center for years to come. So it's really just a matter of which side are you on? Are you a Ben Simmons fan? Are you an Embiid fan? Which one would you rather prefer? That's kind of going to be the question that you have to ask yourself. Can they coexist? Because it looks like, obviously the trade deadline's done. So I think this is a crucial time for the 76ers and the 76er faithful. If Simmons and Embiid cannot work this out and work these issues out and figure it out, I think if you're Elton Brand in the front office of the 76ers, you really have to look very closely at potentially trading one of these two. Because I understand that you have two great players and you want them to figure out, because you feel like you would think with two great players, this would give us our best chance to win a championship. But if it's just not working, chemistry is still an issue years later, it's something that you definitely have to visit and you have to consider very heavily if you're Elton Brand. And then you got to figure out, well, which one do we trade? Who is more extendable? Who do we think can still give us a pretty valuable team, and then we add some pieces and then compete and maybe have better chemistry? And which one do we feel like is more expendable? Obviously these are tough decisions to be made, But we'll have to see how the 76ers end the season, because obviously we expect to make the playoffs. But the thing is that I think if the 76ers made it to Eastern Conference Finals, and let's say they got lost in Game 7, I think that might be good enough to keep the two together potentially. But if it's like an early exit, first round, second round, or another third straight year of a semifinals exit, I think it's going to be like, okay, we definitely need to look into making a trade. We definitely need to look into getting rid of one of the other persons, because it's showing too much that it's just not working with these two. And we have to start thinking to ourselves, what is this the ceiling with this team? Because you determine your ceiling off your stars. If this is the furthest your stars can take you, that is your ceiling as a team. And you want an upper ceiling, you may have to trade for a younger who has maybe more potential than that current star, or a better overall player than the star that you have. So that's definitely a decision that has to be looked into depending on how the season potentially ends for the 76ers when it's all said and done. So that's going to be very interesting to see what happens in that regard in the city of Philadelphia of brotherly love. Next segment, we're going to talk about the big 4-team trade the Houston Rockets made a couple of days ago to get Robin Covington. We're going to talk about what is their plan going forward, because obviously they traded Clint Capella to the Atlanta Hawks. And also the Hawks, I want to talk about the Hawks making moves for the future. They made a couple of moves today to kind of get themselves to maybe have a good end to the season and potentially be a playoff team in 2021. Stay tuned for that.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the 76ers adding shooting, and also about the relationship between Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid going into the future. Can they work? Can it coexist? Can it work in Philadelphia? Can Philadelphia break through this year and potentially get their chance to win a championship? Also, we also talked about Oklahoma City staying pat at the deadline, not making a move, keeping to their guns. So now we're going to talk about the big 4-team trade that Houston pulled off earlier this week, a couple of days ago, trading Clint Capella away to the Atlanta Hawks as part of a 4-team deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets. In this agreement, Houston gets Robert Covington, Atlanta gets Clint Capella and Nene, Minnesota gets Malik Beasley, Juancho Hergomez, sorry if I said that wrong, Evan Turner, an Atlanta first-round pick via the Nets, and Denver gets Gerald Green. So, if you look at this trade, obviously the two teams that really got anything out of this trade was the Atlanta Hawks. And I guess you could say Minnesota got some depth now and a pick, but really the Atlanta Hawks and the Houston Rockets. And we're going to focus more on Houston here right now, because Houston's doing a different thing. They feel like they have to win with a small ball lineup. Daryl Morey came out and said he feels like they have the best chance to win a championship with a small ball lineup. So basically what he's saying is, we're not going to have a true center, and we're willing to let Joker and Anthony Davis drop 30 on us a night because we think that we're going to be able to outscore you. Like, because they feel like, okay, Anthony Davis dropped 30, well, James can drop 30. Everybody's spread across the floor. Now that everybody can shoot, Russell can get into the paint much easier. One-on-one matchups. I mean, matchup-wise, it is a matchup problem for any team that plays Houston. So it's not like this matchup is going to be like, oh, now Houston's going to fall down. But it's just also Houston gives themselves problems defensively, because now if a team has a very good skilled big man, they don't really have anybody who can guard him. And then they had got Jordan Bell back in this trade too, but they traded him. And a lot of people felt like that could have been a steal, because Jordan Bell was he's basically Clint Capella, athletic rebounding guy, and they traded him away, and people were like, why wouldn't you keep him? You could have had, you still at least have you some type of center. Because remember, they traded both Nene and Clint away. Those were the two centers they had. I think the Rockets have Tyson Chandler, I believe. I think they have Tyson Chandler, so they have a center. It's just Tyson Chandler has not been asked to barely play any minutes this year and do a lot. So coming out of the blue and saying, yeah, Tyson Chandler, we need you to start playing 20 minutes a game, I don't know. We don't know if that's what they're going to actually do. And I mean, obviously they added Robert Covington for shooting because obviously that's what they feel like they need is more shooting. And so they feel like with a starting lineup of Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Eric Gordon, I guess Robert Covington at the 4, and PJ Tucker at the 5. I mean, you just kind of look at the team and you're just kind of like, I mean, yeah, everybody can shoot, but defensively, if a guy, like I said, if a team has a dominant big man, it's going to be a long day for the Houston Rockets. And that's why I think a lot of people question this trade, because what can they win with this type of lineup? A lot of people feel like this isn't going to get you any closer to a championship. Like, I understand you want to have a small ball lineup, but at least have some type of center. Like, a lot of people, they always like to talk about how Golden State had a small ball lineup, but a lot of people don't forget, like, Golden State used that lineup to end the game or in the middle of a game, not to start the game, and that's your main lineup all the way through. That's why it's a little different with Houston doing it here than the way Golden State actually tried to execute their small ball lineup back before. That's why a lot of people feel like this maybe isn't the best decision for them to make at this moment, because, like I said, defensively you're lacking. I mean, obviously you're putting a lot of pressure on the starting 5 to score a bunch of your points too, I feel like, because I've never felt like Houston was that deep on the bench. I mean, you have Austin Rivers and other guys, but I've never felt like they were that deep on the bench. So I think, you're putting a lot of pressure on the starting lineup to basically make at least 23s a game, I would think would be the number you want for Houston. You have to make at least 23s, which is 60 points a game. And then you get some inside shots too, because you have to think about it. Houston is a very big analytics team. They're one of the teams that truly goes with analytics. That's why they hired Mike D'Antoni, because the offense fits the analytical offense that they want to run. Shoot threes and layups and dunks. And also fouls. So I think it's a very interesting dilemma, since that is the case. We're going to have to see what happens. We're going to have to see how it turns out. We're going to have to see how it works out for the Houston Rockets. I mean, obviously James Harden has to get out of his funk he's been in. He has to start playing better. Russell obviously has gotten worse than 3 from this year. I think he's shooting 22%, but he'll need to improve that. But also, again, this trade does help Russell in the fact that he can get into the paint a little bit easier now, because the court is all spread out at all times now. Obviously, we hope Robert Covington can come in and give you about 3 to 5 threes a game, 3 to 5, about between 9 and 15 points off 3-point shots. Obviously, PJ Tucker, he's a sturdy defender, hit the 3 ball here and there. And obviously, Eric Gordon is a guy who is always the X factor in my opinion, because he can always go off. Eric Gordon has all the potential. I mean, remember, he was drafted to be a star player in this league, and he never was the star player that we thought, but he's always had the ability to play and have a star performance. So, honestly, all we can do is see what they can do. And it's crazy because they play the Lakers, and obviously, they don't have a center, so they're going into that game definitely kind of, all right, so I guess Tyson Chandler's going to start, because I don't believe Robert Covington is playing. I don't know. He might play tonight. We'll have to see. If he does, I mean, we'll see the new look Rockets, and we'll have to see how it looks against the Lakers. If they were able to come out with a win, that'd be a very big statement for them, because now a lot of people are questioning this trade. And like, well, we were still one of the best teams in LA. We were able to beat the #1 seed in the Western Conference with our small ball lineup. So we feel pretty good that with this lineup, we can win a championship. And with Mike D'Antoni's system, we can do what we got to do to be successful. So we'll have to see if Daryl Morey is a mad genius or a mad scientist at the end of all this. And also, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who also got Clint Capella. The Atlanta Hawks also traded for 2 players, I believe, one from the Clippers and one from Memphis, I believe. They also traded for Dwayne Dedman, the player, he played for them last year. They've traded for Dwayne Dedman too. They traded away Alex Lynn and Jabari Parker. And I think that the Hawks are kind of setting themselves up for next year, because one of the biggest issues Atlanta has is that they struggled defensively and they didn't have a true center who could defend. Because if you look at the lineup, their two best players, John Collins and Trae Young, were not very good defenders. They're actually liabilities defensively, but they never had a good enough center to kind of mask those deficiencies. Dwayne Dedman is a shot blocking center who can stretch the floor a little bit. He's not going to go out of his way and get you 30, but he can score, give you maybe double-double, 10 and 10 potentially. Also, trading for Clint Capella was big because he's a guy who was very athletic, great on the pick and roll with alley hoops, can also block shots. They got two guys who can block shots. Obviously, Dwayne Dedman has more range as a shooter, but they have two guys who can now man the middle that can also help John Collins down there, since he's a liability on the defensive end, but can give you points on the other end. And obviously, there was a report that came out from the Ringer this week saying that the Hawks don't really want to pay John Collins. So John Collins could potentially next year be his last year with the Atlanta Hawks, knowing that he'll be a free agent at the end of next year. So, a restricted free agent. So we'll have to see. So, it'll be interesting to see what this team looks like next year. You would think the starting lineup moving forward would be Trae, Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, and Clint Capella, which is not a bad lineup. If you pay attention at all to Hawks basketball, we all know what Trae's done. Trae has had a fantastic year. Kevin Huerter is one of the better players you haven't heard of, young player. John Collins also was one of the better players you haven't heard of, probably, if you don't pay attention to the Hawks. And also DeAndre Hunter is coming into his own with Cam Reddish coming off the bench when they're two of their first round draft picks this year. Adding Clint Capella and Dwayne Dedman's going to set them up potentially for a season next year. Because obviously they had a lot of cap room too coming into this offseason. And obviously this free agency isn't really clouded with talent. So taking on these contracts that Clint and Dwayne have isn't really hurting the Hawks. So we'll have to see how it turns out, but they're making moves and we'll have to see how this works out. If the Hawks play better at the end of the year, this might give a lot of people in Atlanta hope that their team might be actually very relevant going into next year. So we're going to have to see what happens in that regard. We're going to have to see how that actually turns out. But coming up next, Andre Drummond traded for nothing. DeAndre Russell also traded a big deal to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Andrew Wiggins. The Miami Heat get Andre Iguodala and more from the Memphis Grizzlies. Find out all that and more right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we talked about more trade news around the league, as we talked about the big 14 trade with the Houston Rockets, the Hawks, the Timberwolves, and the Nuggets. We also talked about the Hawks making moves to the future, trying to get the team ready for maybe a playoff run in 2021. So obviously that's big news obviously coming out of the trade deadline. But now we're going to get some more trade news, some bigger trades here. Andre Drummond was finally traded. He was traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers tonight for, and guess what, guys? It's going to be a very big deal, big haul here. Brandon Knight, John Henson, and a second round pick. Yep, that's all. A lot of people had a very reaction of like, wait, so he got traded for nothing? Like, think about it. They were holding out on teams wanting bigger hauls, and then they trade and get that. Sometimes holding out to get a bigger deal can backfire on a team, because some teams are not willing to budge, and then you end up having to take a deal just to get them off your hands. And the problem is you're not really getting the right compensation back in return. And this may be one of those situations. Because you look at this deal and you're just kind of like, I mean, Brandon Knight, I mean, a lot of people forgot Brandon Knight was still, like, honestly, a lot of people forgot Brandon Knight was still in the league. I mean, obviously nobody watches Cleveland a lot of the time. I mean, we're just being honest here. A lot of people don't watch Cleveland. I mean, obviously you know about Colin Sexton and Kevin Love and Tristan Thompson. I mean, we know about them and, Darius Garland. But, outside of that, we didn't know Brandon Knight was still even in the league. And you traded him, Andre Drummond, a 2-time All-Star, having career highs in points and rebounds for him and John Henson. It kind of feels like I said, it's just one of those things that they kind of just gave up somebody because they had to make the trade. They had to get him off their hands, but they weren't able to maybe get a deal that they maybe wanted. Makes you wonder, what were teams offering for Derrick Rose maybe? Could they have gotten more for Derrick Rose? But I mean, I feel like they're more like I feel like they were more determined to get Andre Drummond off their hands than Derrick Rose. So that could be one of the reasons why they took the deal, like I said today. But you're very underwhelmed at the deal they took. You scratch your head a little bit like, is this really it? I mean, it's one thing. I remember for the Hawks, when the Hawks were trying to make a deal, they were not budging unless they gave them a first. They took a 2nd round pick. It just really makes you feel like it's a case of they held out. They thought they could get more. People weren't willing to give up more for Drummond. And then that kind of cost them because now they had to take something and it wasn't good at all. And you also have to be honest about Andre Drummond. Drummond is not a typical center in today's NBA that would fit prototypically into a lot of offenses. He is a traditional back under the back guy, which can work, but he can be a liability at times. Free throw line, obviously, against guys who can stretch the floor at the center position. And he isn't a guy that anybody's willing to sell the boat for. So I feel like if you could you have to kind of be realistic about the best deal you can get. I can understand getting a deal and saying, okay, is anybody willing to up this deal? And then if nobody takes it, take it. But don't sit here and say we're going to stand pat with Andre Drummond and then knowing that we're going to get rid of him at all costs, and then you stand pat for a better deal, never get that better deal. Then the deal that you had that was potentially your best deal is off the table, and now you got to take such a lesser deal to get rid of him, and then it just makes you look like, yo, dang, you gave him up for absolutely nothing. Like, what were you doing, Detroit? So obviously a lot of people are going to be wondering about that. Wondering about this deal, wondering if it was worth what they gave up. And other big trade news, D'Angelo Russell traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Andrew Wiggins. Obviously, this was a big trade. Obviously, this is a trade that a lot of people were shocked by. I mean, we knew Minnesota has been wanting D'Lo for a while. It's been reported for a while. They were willing to try to do anything to get D'Angelo Russell off the Warriors' hands. And maybe one of the things that was holding up the trade was giving up Andrew Wiggins, because potentially they may have been like, well, can we potentially keep Wiggins, bring in D'Lo, have Karl Anthony Towns, and go with our little big three and maybe see if we can make a push, perhaps. But I guess they couldn't. They gave up Andrew Wiggins, and they made the best out of their trade. They did what they felt like they had to do. I mean, they also the Warriors sent Russell to the Wolves for Andrew Wiggins, a 2021 protected first round pick and a 2021 protected second round pick. Obviously, Cat and D'Lo are playing together. This is the duo. They expect them to take them into the future. Obviously, Karl Anthony Towns is one of the best in terms of talents, best centers in the league. D'Angelo Russell is one of the best young up-and-coming guards in the league. All-star guard, made the all-star team with the Brooklyn Nets. So it's definitely a trade that I think that they feel like was worth it. And, I mean, listen, Minnesota's wanted D'Angelo Russell since the offseason. So I think that's something that they really enjoyed. I mean, the Warriors are giving up Jacob Evans and Amari Spellman, but, it works. It works. And also, this also helps the Warriors get off of a big financial burden. Was also getting rid of some of that D'Lo money, because everybody was kind of intrigued by the fact that was intrigued by the fact that the Warriors went out of their way to get D'Angelo Russell this year. Even though, I mean, obviously Clay was out, but you thought Steph was going to play, and people were trying to see what was happening. So they signed him to a max. They brought him in with Steph and Clay and Draymond. Steph got hurt, so it was just D'Angelo Russell most of the year. And there's reports coming out that the Warriors gave up on D'Angelo Russell. That they just don't think he works there. Doesn't fit there, and he isn't in their long-term plans, and so they were very eager to get rid of him, and that's why they made this deal. Obviously, there was a report about a day ago saying they wanted to wait to see what happened with Steph Curry. Obviously, I guess that changed, and they said, no, we need to get rid of him now. So, we'll have to see what Wiggins does. Obviously, Golden State is known to be one of the funnest organizations to play for, because the team likes to have a lot of fun. They like to have tons of fun, and etc. So it's definitely something that, Wiggins has always been questioned about his passion and desire to play the game of basketball. A lot of people have questioned, does he even want to play? Obviously, playing on this team, you would think hopefully he'll be motivated. I mean, listen, when Clay comes back next year, Wiggins is there, Curry's there. I mean, this team could you would think this team would make the playoffs. And, we'll have to see how he plays with this type of unit. With playing with a guy like Steph and Clay, who know how to win, who are motivated, who are driven in this game. It'll be interesting to kind of see, like, how it all works out. Like, it really does. We'll have to see how it all works out for them. So we wish D'Lo the best in Minnesota. Hopefully they can make a little run, and we miss Andrew Wiggins the best in Golden State. And some last trade news here. Obviously another big trade. Andre Iguodala was finally traded after all the talk smacks by John Morant and Dylan Brooks about him not wanting to play for them and he wanted to play for a contender. He was finally traded to Miami Heat. Miami Heat really didn't give up too much to get Andre Iguodala. They gave up Kevin Winslow. Really backflipped for Kevin Winslow for Andre Iguodala. They feel like this is what they need to maybe make a push and run in the playoffs. Miami Heat, who have obviously overachieved by standards beginning of the season. Obviously, Andre Iguodala also will sign an extension there also with the team, so he will also probably, more than likely, you probably think would end his career there. So this will be a very big trade, interesting trade for them. They probably feel really good about themselves, and they think that this is a much needed trade. Also, Miami made a couple other trades to get Solomon Hill and Jay Crowder also from Memphis in that trade. So obviously they got the guy they wanted. They added some depth, they added some talent. And now we'll have to see how this Miami Heat team looks going into the future. And we just got to see what happens coming into it and see how far Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat can go with this roster. But coming up next, the All-Star teams, Team LeBron and Team Giannis, have been drafted. I'll give you both starting lineups. And we'll also talk about some players who we thought were going to be traded but weren't traded. My thoughts on that and more coming up next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we talked about the Andre Drummond getting traded for literally nothing to the Cleveland Cavaliers. D'Angelo Russell being traded in a big deal to Minnesota for Andrew Wiggins. and how that looks for both of those teams moving forward. And also, the Miami Heat get pick up Andre Iguodala and more from the Memphis Grizzlies. So as you can tell, both teams, a lot of teams making a lot of chaos moves. Like I told you, a lot of stuff happens on the trade deadline day. Everybody makes moves. Everybody's trying to get better. It's just constant, all over the place, non-stop action. A lot of trade news. We have more coming up, but we're going to get into the All-Star draft that was tonight. Team LeBron versus Team Giannis. Starting lineups have been selected. I will tell you both starting lineups, starting with Team LeBron. The starters for Team LeBron, obviously LeBron. Next in the starting lineup, Anthony Davis, obviously. He was LeBron's second pick, which you would expect because, obviously that's his guy. Then Giannis took Joel Embiid, so Joel Embiid is starting with Giannis. Then LeBron came back, picked Kawhi Leonard. Then Siakam was picked by Giannis. Then Doncic was picked by LeBron. Then Kemba was picked by Giannis. Then Harden was picked by LeBron. Trae Young was picked by Giannis. Damian Lillard was put by LeBron. I'll just give out the rest of them for both teams on each side. For the rest of the team, LeBron, Damian Lillard, Ben Simmons, Nikola Jokic, Jason Tatum, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, and Sabonis. On the rest of the Giannis side of things, Middleton, Adebayo, Gobert, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Brandon Ingram, and Donovan Mitchell. Now, if you look at both of these teams, I think everybody's thinking the same thing. LeBron won for the second year in a row. It's kind of weird. It makes you kind of sometimes think maybe if this is like scripted. Because you would just think, why is it that LeBron's team looks so much more dominant than I mean, is Giannis really not picking? Like, you had a chance to pick these guys for LeBron. Like, how do you pick him over? You're kind of confused. Like, how do you pick this person over this person? It makes you look like, well, Team LeBron should definitely win this game. I mean, obviously they're doing a different type of All-Star game this year. Obviously they're doing a Kobe tribute. Obviously both teams are going to be wearing both his daughter and Kobe's number. So, it's one of those things where I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Giannis, you need to work on your GM skills. If you play 2K, you play franchise mode. I'm a little worried about how you're building the team. It's actually interesting if you think about it, if a player plays franchise mode with his team. Because it's like, if he trades certain guys, it's like, oh, so is that how you feel in real life potentially? Like, anybody like, I don't like playing with him, I don't like playing with him in the game. Something like that. But, Giannis needs to work on his, drafting skills. I mean, listen, it's kind of weird. It kind of makes you realize how big of a deficit from the top players are in the league to the bottom. All these players are all-stars, but you just feel like the Giannis' team is so insignificant in terms of talent to them, because it feels like LeBron picked all the highest end players, where Giannis picked a lot of the good but all-star players, but not like superstar players outside of him and Embiid. And Embiid, you don't know what you're going to get from him on a night-to-night basis. So it's a very interesting, I think, situation. We'll have to see what happens going into it. So, obviously, like I said, those are your teams for both Team LeBron and Team Giannis. Now we're going to get into some news and just talk about some players that were on the trade market, potentially could have been traded but weren't traded. My thoughts and opinions. Obviously, the first person we'll start with is Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose is in a lot of people's talking for getting traded because he has emerged as he was probably one of the top trade options out there in terms of talent, in terms of players that are playing very well. I feel like that they have that Detroit probably felt like, Derrick Rose has another year with us, so we really didn't have to trade him now. But maybe this offseason potentially he could get traded. Maybe by next trade deadline he could get traded. They have a lot of options and leeway here with Derrick Rose. I'm sure teams called about Derrick Rose and wanted to get Derrick Rose. I'm sure of it. I am absolutely sure that they wanted to get him and bring him into the lineup. So, I mean, we're going to have to see, what happens with Derrick Rose going into the future. Obviously, another player that was talked about a lot, Danilo Gallinari. He was kept by the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's had one of his best years, and he's been healthy. And he's on a very affordable contract, so obviously he was a guy who, obviously people looking for shooters, versatile guys. He was a guy that a lot of people felt like could go get picked up by him. Obviously they didn't. So I think that was very interesting that they didn't actually go and pick him up. Nobody did. I think he would have been a great addition to any team. It was just one of those things where you just kind of have to see. I guess maybe Oklahoma City felt like, unless they get a trade deal that kind of blew their mind, it was better for them to probably stand pat, keep who they have, and just go moving forward with the same talent that they've had for the last couple of years. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If I'm Oklahoma City, this would probably be how I would feel too about it, because you never want to make unnecessary trades if you don't got to. Don't feel like you're under pressure to move and trade and do all these different things, because you don't want to be made or forced into a bad decision. And obviously the Thunder and Detroit felt like in their positioning, we didn't want to get a trade that we didn't feel like was going to benefit us. So we were not going to pull the trigger, and we decided to just go ahead and keep him. We'll have to see what happens during the deadline and see how it actually ends up and turns out. So, also Kyle Kuzma. Obviously, he was a big name that people were thinking the Lakers, the only real legitimate trade asset they have. People were looking at potentially them getting rid of Kyle Kuzma. They kept him. I think it was a good decision. I think you need that. I think Kyle Kuzma is the only other player who can get his own shot on the team. And yes, he could be a little sporadic, and yes, he has holes in his game, but what young player doesn't? And I just think that you never know. Kyle Kuzma could really come up clutch for these guys when you least expect it. You never know. You really don't. They have all the talent in the world to be very successful. I think we'll have to see how the chemistry and everything works with Kyle Kuzma on the team. And we'll have to see how things turn out with Kyle Kuzma on the team. Obviously, maybe he can get more adjusted to his role in the starting lineup with the Lakers. Not the starting lineup, but just in his lineup in the rotation, him off the bench with the Lakers. And we're going to have to just see what kind of happens in that regard. Kyle Kuzma, I like him. I think a lot of teams would love to have him. I don't know how hard teams press for him. We haven't gotten any reports about anybody who's really gone out of their way to get him, but I'm sure the Lakers had discussions with multiple teams, and people were wondering, well, who's going to go pick him up? Who's going to go make that big deal to get him and things like that? So we're going to have to definitely keep an eye on that situation in LA. Obviously Kyle Kuzma's also under contract for another year too. So maybe this isn't over yet. I always like to say, if you were maybe considered getting traded at the trade deadline, depending on how the season ends for Kyle Kuzma, he might be still on the market even next year, going to next year's trade deadline, or even over the offseason, depending on what happens with this Lakers season and how he plays. So we're going to have to definitely stay tuned for that. Like I said, Lakers, in general, the Lakers stand at pat at the trade deadline to make any type of move. So we would have to definitely see what the future kind of holds for Kyle Kuzma and the Lakers. And hopefully them staying pat at the trade deadline will work out for them when it comes to winning. Because if Kyle Kuzma struggles and the Lakers lose, it kind of sits. You're gonna sit there and think, could their days potentially be numbered in LA with the Lakers? But coming up next, we're gonna talk about who I think won the trade deadline, who I think got better, who I think maybe didn't help themselves as much. We'll talk about all that and more right here on the podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we talked about just what players should Pat, who we were surprised by staying Pat. We were shocked that certain players weren't traded. I named like a couple of few. We also talked about the all-star lineups that were drafted tonight by Team LeBron and Team Giannis. I gave you both lineups in the last segment, so if you want to know the players who were drafted to both teams, go check that out. Now we're going to talk about some of the winners and losers of the trade deadline. For every trade, I feel like there is a winner and there is a loser. So really, the major trades, you'll decide who won that, basically won the day, or who lost the day. We're going to start with the big Minnesota trade with the Golden State Warriors. I do believe that Minnesota won that trade. I think Minnesota didn't have to give up they gave up stuff, but they feel like they got the guy they wanted that they feel like fits with Karl Anthony Towns. Because the thing about Andrew Wiggins when he was on the team is he's a small forward. So, and they always kind of had that hole at point. DeAndre Russell is a guy who can give you 20 a game and who can, work really well off the pick and roll. He would probably work very well with Karl Anthony Towns. So I feel like Minnesota was able to get one of the best options they could potentially get, which I think would help them in the future. So, I think that Minnesota won that trade, so I think they won the trade deadline for them. I think Golden State, they also won. This is one of the few trades that you feel like both teams won, even though maybe you feel like they maybe could have gotten slightly more back in return. You have to think about it. It's all about the future for Golden State. You still have a star on your team. Andrew Wiggins is not a scrub. And you pair him with D'Angelo Russell, Steph Curry and Klay when he gets back, assuming that they're planning on keeping Wiggins, that's 3 stars right there. And then we'll see what happens with Draymond Green this offseason and how they fill out the rest of the team. We'll see what happens when they make the adjustments that are necessary to the team. If they can maybe get a Giannis. Remember, they were also maybe looking and trying to get Karl, but I think that's obviously unlikely now at this point. The Warriors have all the capability, especially probably getting a very high lottery draft pick, to be very competitive with that team next year with those 3 players as their center piece and maybe potentially them win over a draft pick in next year's draft coming to them. And that probably could be your big 4 for the future for the Golden State Warriors because they're one of the best teams in the league at planning ahead, building ahead, and being ready for that next wave of years to be competitive where other teams sometimes think about the now. A team that I felt like lost, Detroit Pistons. They didn't get anything back for Andre Drummond, and they didn't trade Derrick Rose to maybe make up for the composition they didn't get with Andre Drummond. So overall, they didn't really improve for the future, and they really didn't improve now. They just got worse. So I feel like this really hurt them, and I think that they're pretty much a team that has lost at the trade deadline. I mean, again, like I told you, like maybe it was just them trying to hold out for a better deal, and it actually got progressively worse, and they just had to take whatever they could get because they wanted him to leave. But I mean, they felt like maybe was possible and doable. Obviously, we'll have to see, obviously overall what's next in the future. So, it's going to be very interesting to see that moving into the future. What Detroit tries to do to rectify this situation. Maybe try to get a better haul next year, maybe? We'll have to see with Derrick Rose, but we'll have to see. That's a loser for me. The Clippers are winners today. I think the Clippers improved their team, made their team more versatile, made themselves just a better overall team. And when you do that, I feel like you've done everything that you can do to get yourself ready to make that playoff run and to beat the team that people think you're going to have to go through to get to the NBA Finals, the LA Lakers. They've improved as a team, and that's basically what you would want at all times, is to improve as a team. And so that really is absolutely fantastic. They were able to pick up Marcus Morris and Adam and made the group the lineup more versatile and absolutely give up absolutely nothing in the process. So I feel like that's obviously a great addition on their end also. I feel like the 76ers won also at the deadline, getting 2 shooters. That's what they need. They got 2 guys, which can help extend their lineup and then give them enough shooting. Honestly, at the end of the day, they got what they were lacking. Now they have to work. Now the chemistry has to improve, and they have to fix what potentially they've been missing throughout the off season. And fixing what's been a lingering issue. Can Embiid and Simmons work together? I feel like Houston lost because I feel like, you have a small ball team, but is it worth it? Was it worth giving up Clint Capella and Nene for Robert Covington just to say, okay, we're going to do a small ball lineup and that's how we're going to win games? That's how we think we're going to win a championship. We're just going to small ball everybody to death. I mean, it's a crazy experiment, and all you can do right now is kind of say it's not going to work. But we'll have to see if it actually does end up working or not working. We really can't judge it till we see results and how it actually goes on the floor. And so we're going to have to see about that at the end of the day. But y'all thought this podcast, I understand the NBA trade deadline was today, but y'all thought this was only going to be NBA? I got to at least give you a couple minutes of some college basketball. I at least got to inform you about some of the biggest games coming up also this weekend. And we're going to talk about, there's a big matchup on Friday night, Maryland versus Illinois, 9 versus 20, 8 o'clock on Fox Sports. It's going to be in Champaign, the State Farm Center. Illinois is coming off a loss. 8-2 in their last 10. Maryland winners of last 5, 8-2 in the last 10. So obviously that's a big matchup coming in. Both teams are looking to get an impressive win to continue to help their resume going into the future. Obviously we got to get to the Saturday games. Big game in the SEC. Actually, the number 1 team in the SEC is the LSU Tigers from a conference record perspective over the the Auburn Tigers. It's a Tiger versus Tiger matchup, ESPN, 12 o'clock noon game. Auburn's on a 5-game winning streak. LSU did just lose their last game, so obviously they're looking for this game to bounce back and play better and contribute on a better level. Obviously, both teams are just trying to get a solidified head start in the SEC, and this, obviously being in the SEC West and NFL and the sports and in the college basketball, it just really helps everything out. Obviously, big matchup, Michigan State versus Michigan. Obviously, Michigan State lost their last game. They lost 2 in a row. To be matter of fact, they're 6-4 in their last 10. A lot of alumni, a lot of former players are calling out the basketball players. It made Izzo have to go out of his way and talk and say, hey, it's not like we're 5-20, we're 16-7. So let's not sit up here and act like the whole sky is falling because we've lost some games. Obviously, Michigan's sky was falling. They were 4-6 in their last 10. They lost their last game. They were after that great start at the beginning of the season. They've kind of fell off a little bit, so this will be a great game for both teams. Kentucky and Tennessee, obviously another big game. Kentucky's looking, to play well and really just bounce back from their loss against Auburn. Just getting an impressive win against Tennessee, a team that's not to be overlooked and taken lightly. Seton Hall versus Villanova. Both teams, Villanova's lost 2 straight. Seton Hall's 1-1. It's a 12 versus 10 matchup. Seton Hall's 9-11 won in their last games. And this is a big new matchup for Nova to kind of bounce back from the loss they just suffered and to get back on a good winning track. Obviously, we have the big game between Duke and UNC. From a record perspective, it doesn't look that way because UNC has not looked good all year out, but now they've gotten their 5-star recruit back. And, you know, hopefully maybe Cole Anthony can change some things. They've lost two in a row, 3-7 in the last 10. Duke looking like one of the best teams in the nation. And you feel like they have all the reasons in the world to still be looked at as that because it's the Duke Blue Devils and they've been the most consistent. But that's all we have for you today on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Brice Lewis. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Leave a review, subscribe, all of that. Please follow us also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I appreciate y'all tuning in and listening. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.